Morning, Year 7. This is Mr. Azapadi with another video about this unit of whether there are good reasons to believe in God. So far we've looked at a few reasons for and against believing in God. We looked at the cosmological argument, which is a reason, an argument for believing in God. And we looked at the miracles, which is an argument for believing in God. And we looked at the problem of evil, which was an argument against believing in God. Now, remember, when we say argument, we mean the reason someone gives for what they believe. So we're looking at another argument in favour of believing in God today. I'm going to see whether it's an argument that works. So the title is, Does the Teleological Argument Prove that God is Real? Now, what I could say here is that I think if you went like 200 years ago or so, this would probably be one of the most famous arguments and the most popular reasons why people believed in God. But because of scientific findings that have happened since then, this argument is no longer as popular as it used to be. So it's an interesting one, I think. I think it used to be very popular, but it's not as popular as it used to be. So first thing I want to do is write some definitions down. So can you write these sentences in your book? The teleological argument is also known as the design argument. So teleological is the fancier word. The design argument is the other word for it. It says that some things in the world are so complicated they must have been designed by a god. That's the idea. The idea is that there are some things in our world that are very, very complicated, and they prove that there's a God because they must have been designed by God. And look, you can see that we've got a picture of an eye, a picture of a watch, and a picture of a guy with a funny hat. Now, those things are all part of the argument. So for this lesson, there's going to be a worksheet, and you need to download that worksheet, print it out if you can, or you can fill it out electronically on the computer. But what we're going to do is we're going to go through the argument. And then I'm going to pause the video and I'm going to ask you to answer the questions on one side of the worksheet, and then we're going to look at the criticisms of this argument, why people say this doesn't prove there's a God, and you're going to fill in the second side of your worksheet. So first of all, just listen, have the worksheet in front of you and listen to this part of the video, and I'll tell you when you need to fill things in. So William Paley, the guy in the funny hat, was a philosopher. He lived between 1743 and 1805. He thought that he could prove that God existed. And here's what he said. He said, if you were walking across a field and found a watch, he's talking about an old-fashioned clockwork watch, like the one you can see in the photo. If you found it on the floor, you would know it was designed by someone and it didn't just happen naturally. Well, that seems obvious, right? We all know that watches are made by people. They don't just grow on the floor. However, he then said you would know this even if you didn't know what a watch was and had never seen one before. Imagine you'd never seen a watch before. He said you would still know that it was designed by someone, that it didn't just grow there. That's an interesting thing to say. Here's the reasons why. So why did he think that you would know that a watch was designed by someone had made it? He said, first of all, it's complicated. Look at the way the cogs and other parts fit together. They fit in a very complicated way. They have to be just so, or the watch doesn't work. He said, well, that just couldn't happen by accident. It couldn't just happen by accident that everything fits together so neatly. Secondly, because it has a purpose. It's there for a reason. It is there to tell the time, and all the complicated arrangement of its parts helps to fill that purpose. So it's there to do something, to tell the time, and it's all fitted together very exactly to do that thing. And Paley says that means that someone must have made it. It can't just have, it's not just like something you'd find on the floor by accident. So he says, when we see a watch, we know there must be someone like this, a watchmaker. There's an old-fashioned watchmaker. So far, I think we can all agree with that. If we saw a watch, yes, it is complicated. It has got a purpose, and therefore we do know that someone made it. What's that got to do with God? Well, let's have a look at the next bit. Paley said that some things in nature are a bit like a watch. Some things in nature are a bit like a watch. Let's have a look at his example. So the example he uses is the human eye. He said, for example, the human eye is like a watch because A, it's complicated. We said the watch is complicated. And the eye is complicated. Look at that diagram. I've got a picture of an eye, but then next to it I've got a diagram of a cross-section of the eye. And you can see it's got all these parts that fit together in a complicated way. The pupil, the iris, the cornea, the lens. You've got the optic nerve, all these different things that help you to see. Secondly, it has a purpose. The watch has a purpose to tell the time. The purpose of the eye is to see, and all its parts fit together in a way that helps it bring about this purpose. So Here's an interesting thing. He said a watch has a purpose and is very complicated, and therefore it must have a designer. But a human eye is also complicated and also seems to have a purpose. So what does this mean? Well, he says this: if the human eye is like a watch, then we know a watch is designed by someone, then the human eye must have a designer too. But we know the eye wasn't designed by a human. Therefore, there must be a God who designed the eye. Something designed in such a complicated way to bring about a specific purpose could not just happen by accident. That's what William Paley says. So that is his basic argument, that a human eye is complicated, it has a purpose, and we know things that are very complicated and fit together in a complicated way and have a purpose are designed by someone. But we know the human eye wasn't designed by a person. We can't find a person who's the designer of the human eye. So it must have been designed by God. There must be a God who created humans and created the world and created our eyes for the purpose to see. Now, look, the eye isn't the only example. There are lots of things in nature which, when you look at them, are very complicated and seem to have a clear purpose. If we look at a bird's wing, well, the parts of a bird's wing fit together in a fantastically complicated way, all to bring about a specific aim, that is, to help the bird fly. So this was for many people in Paley's time, this seemed clear. Some things in the world have been designed, and if they've been designed, there must be a designer. Just like for the watch, there must be a watchmaker, there must be a designer, and that must be God. So what I want you to do is pause the video and have a look in your worksheet and see if you can answer questions 1 to 4 in your worksheet. They are just explaining what Paley said. So you wanted to explain, what are the 2 things about a watch that makes it look designed? How is the eye similar to the watch? Well, it's got those 2 same features. Why does this make Paley think there's a God, and so on and so on? It also asks you to give some examples of your own, of things that look like, which are complicated and look like they've been designed in the world. A bird's wing could be one, but can you think of any others? If you're not sure about anything here, go back and watch the video again, the first part of the video, because that will help you. Okay, pause the video now then, complete 1 to 4 in your worksheet, and then go back to the video. Okay, we should have questions 1 to 4 completed. Let's go through the second part. This is going to be a look at how we could criticize Paley's argument, because, like I said before, at one time this was a very, very popular reason for people to believe in God, but I don't think it's that popular anymore, even among people who do believe in God. So there's lots of people who believe in God now, but who wouldn't say that Paley has given them a good reason to believe in God. They would say this isn't. A lot of Christians or other people who believe in God might say this isn't actually the best reason that we have to believe in God. So Paley is right when he says that many things in nature look like they have been designed by someone. So it is true that there are things in nature that look like they've been designed. But is he right when he says these things prove there is a God? We're going to look at the theory of evolution by natural selection, which says that there is a way in which things in the natural world can come about without a designer, but still look like they were designed. So it says, yes, things look like they're designed, but actually they came about with no designer. In a way, they came about just by accident, but they look like they're designed. Now, this theory was first devised by Charles Darwin, who lived in 1809 to 1882. He was born just after William Paley died. So if William Paley had known about Charles Darwin's theories, he may not have believed in his theory. He was a naturalist. A naturalist is someone who studies the natural world, so animals and plants and things. And he travelled the world studying different kinds of animals. So he went on this voyage on a ship called the Beagle, which travelled around the world, and he was the ship's naturalist, so he spent his time looking at the different animals they came across in different parts of the world, and he was studying why they're different. He was particularly interested in why similar animals in different places demonstrated small but important differences from each other. So he noticed that when he went around the world, he often found similar animals in different places, but the similar animals had little differences. Now, in particular, he studied finches, kind of bird. So he studied finches in the Galapagos Islands, a group of islands in the Pacific Ocean. He found that finches on different islands had different shaped beaks, which helped them to get the food available on that island. So, for example, in islands where most of the food available was insects, birds tended to have sharper pointier beaks, which helped them to be more nimble in grabbing insects and picking them up. In places where the food to eat was things like nuts, they would tend to have these harder, thicker beaks, which they could use to peck the nuts open and eat them. So each bird seemed to be designed to eat the food on its island. The question is, did God design each bird with exactly the right kind of beak that it needed to survive? So does all this prove there's a God? Did God say, well, I'm going to put a bird here, so I'll give it a thin beak to eat insects. I'm going to put another bird here, so I'll give it with a thick beak to peck open nuts and eat them. Well, Darwin didn't think so. Darwin didn't think this proved there's a God. We're going to look at giraffes. So Darwin was looking at a similar question to William Paley. He had a similar question in his mind. His question was this: why does it look like some things in the natural world were designed by someone? You know, we just saw with the finches, it looks like someone's designed the finches with the right kind of beak. To take another example, giraffes have long necks, which help them to find food because the food they eat is at the top of the trees. Without these necks, they would find it difficult to survive. So giraffes would find it difficult to survive without their long necks because the necks are... sorry, there's a typo there. It says without these necks, these would find it difficult to survive. It could say without these necks, they would find it difficult to survive. So, you know, that the food they want to get is at the top of the trees. Without the long necks, they wouldn't be able to get that food, and so they'd find it difficult to survive. So does this prove that giraffes were designed by God? That God had said, look, I'm going to make giraffes, I'm going to put them in this part of the world, so I'm going to give them a long neck to get the food. Again, Darwin didn't think so. He thought there was another explanation. To understand his explanation, we've got to understand a couple of things. First, we've got to understand descent with modification. Now, descent with modification is this idea. When animals have children, Darwin discovered, some will be different from their parents in small ways. So, you know, children generally look like their parents, but children don't look exactly like their parents. They will have some differences, and some of these will be significant. So say here's two giraffes who have children. Some of their children might look very like them, have short necks, but one might be born with a slightly longer neck. And that's something that happens all the way through nature. When animals reproduce, the offspring will have slight differences. Some of the offspring will have slight differences from the parents in the way they behave, in the way they look. So, you know, how could have bigger ears, bigger feet, smaller feet. They might be, in behaviour, they might be more aggressive or more timid or more curious than the parents. Those kind of things. So there are these small differences. Now, descent with modification doesn't tell us on its own why animals today look like they're designed to suit their environment. Because these modifications are random. If the modifications are just random, why do giraffes have long necks which help them to eat the leaves on trees? If it was just random descent with modification, why don't we see lots of different giraffes? Long necks, short necks, some with no necks at all maybe. Why don't we just see a whole different load of giraffes rather than why do all giraffes have long necks? So descent with modification helps us to understand how animals change. It doesn't help us to understand why animals seem so suited or designed for the place where they live. So we have to understand the next bit, and that is what's called evolution by natural selection. So when these modifications happen, when animals change, some of these modifications help animals to survive. Animals with these modifications are more likely to survive than their brothers and sisters without the modification. So if we look at the long neck with a giraffe, if one giraffe is born with a long neck, it's got an advantage over its brothers and sisters. It can eat the leaves at the top of the trees, and the brothers and sisters might not be able to. They might die from a lack of food, but it won't die. Because of that, they can reproduce and have their own children, who will pass the modification on to. So if only the giraffe with a long neck survives and its brothers and sisters die out, the next generation of giraffes is going to have long necks because its parent had a long neck. This is what natural selection means. The modifications which are passed on are selected by nature. It is the ones that will help animals to survive and to reproduce that will be passed on. And that means there is no designer for all this. It all just happens naturally. I hope this all makes sense. It's quite a complicated idea. But the idea is there are these random changes in animals. But some of those random changes won't help the animals to survive. Like if a giraffe had been born with very big feet, well, it would make no difference. So that would just, that would just be a random thing that would die out eventually. But if a giraffe was born with a long neck, well, that helps them to survive. And eventually, that will mean all the giraffes with long necks survive, and in the end, all the giraffes with short necks die out. So suddenly you've got this situation where giraffes have long necks, and it looks like they've been designed with long necks, but really what's happened is all the giraffes without the long necks have died out. Let's look at some pictures that might help us. So look, imagine if giraffes might live in a situation like this, where there's trees, lower trees and higher trees. There's some trees that are low down, some are higher and higher up. In that situation, then giraffes wouldn't evolve long necks, because both the giraffes with the short necks and the long necks can eat their food. The giraffes with the long necks can eat the high up food, and the giraffes with the short necks can eat the low down food. So in that situation, you wouldn't get just giraffes with long necks, because both of these animals would survive by eating food, and then they would be able to reproduce and pass on their necks to their offspring. However, in a situation like this, where all the food is found high up and there's a lack of food elsewhere, then the giraffes with the shorter necks are going to die out. They're not going to be able to get the food. They'll die from lack of food, and therefore they won't pass their shorter necks onto their offspring, and we'll end up with a situation where only giraffes with longer necks will survive. And so that's what we end up with. It looks like giraffes have been designed with long necks to suit their environment, but really what's happened is it's evolution by natural selection. The ones with the longer necks are the ones that have survived. So what would Darwin say about Paley's theory about the eye? Well, the human eye is an amazing thing, and it does look like it's been designed for a purpose. However, Darwin's theory suggests that it really did come about just by accident. Through descent with modification, some of the earliest animals were born with the ability to see. So there must have been a kind of animal originally that couldn't see at all. But some of the offspring of those earliest animals that couldn't see were born with the ability to see. Now, this ability is very useful. It helped those animals to catch food and to see predators. So it helped them to survive in two ways. Seeing means you can catch food, and seeing also means you can run away from things trying to get you. All of this helped the animals with eyes to survive. This meant the eyes were passed on to the next generation. Over thousands of years, through the same process, sorry, there's a typo there, I should say, through the same process, the eye developed to become more and more complicated. The first eyes probably could only see the difference between dark and light. This is useful, but not as useful as a fully working eye. So, when the first eye developed through descent by modification, some animal was just born with an eye, but not a very good eye. The first eye would be a very basic eye, and probably all it could tell was, is it bright or is it dark? But that still helps that animal, because say you're a little animal and a predator, an animal that's going to eat you is coming near to you. If you can tell whether it's light or dark, you can tell if the shade of that animal is over the top of you. And if it is, you run away. And therefore you're more likely to survive than an animal that didn't know that anything was there. Now, gradually, over thousands of years, through more modifications and more natural selection, all animals, including humans, have developed better and better eyes. So, once every animal had evolved an eye, there might be one animal that's evolved with a slightly better eye. Instead of just seeing dark and light, it can make out the slight shape of a creature. So that means it can know when a creature's near, well, that's a creature I want to eat, or the other one's a creature I want to run away from. So then that helps it to survive. And gradually, people, over thousands of years, you get these little modifications and changes that happen naturally, and the ones that help us to have better and better eyesight and to see better and better will be able to will be the ones that survive and the ones that we pass on. So what does all that mean for this belief in God? Well, it means that even though it was quite impressive, William Paley's theory, it kind of made sense that the eye looks like it's complicated and got a purpose because God designed it. Charles Darwin's theory seems to prove that actually there's a way in which the eye came about just by accident, randomly, because we just had these random modifications as animals reproduce over time, and because being able to see and having eyes helped us to survive, well, that modification was passed on down to the next generation. It's a tricky concept, this thing. So that's why in your next set of tasks, one of the tasks is a gap fill exercise, which should help you to understand what we're talking about here. So I want you to pause the video and answer questions 5 to 8 on your worksheet. and then you'll be able to. Then you can see what we think of both sides of the view. We've now got the Paley's teleological argument and Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. So pause the video, try and fill in the second half of your worksheet, and then come back. Okay, you should have tried to fill in the second half of your worksheet. If there's anything in your worksheet that was unclear, just go back and watch the video again and see if you can fill it in. Okay, so our question was, does the teleological argument prove that God is real? And we've looked at lots of different things. William Paley, the watch and the eye. Charles Darwin, giraffes and finches, and the way that evolution works. So what's the answer to this? Well, like I said before, I think in the past this was one of the most convincing reasons why people believed in God. But I'd say today that even many religious people would say, actually, Charles Darwin's theory proves that William Paley didn't quite get it right. That actually there is a way in which we can have complicated things in the natural world, like the human eye or the bird's wing would be another one, and actually we can explain how they came about through evolution by natural selection, because these particular genetic modifications helped animals to survive. That means we don't need to believe in a God to explain why those things are there. Now, that doesn't mean that Darwin has proved that God is not real. All he's proved is that this particular argument, this particular reason for believing in God, perhaps doesn't work as well as it used to. Now, there are other versions of the teleological argument. There are reasons why today many religious people still think there must be a God who designed the world, but those are things that we'll look at in a future year. They're a bit more complicated than what we've looked at today, which I think was complicated enough already. Okay, thank you very much, guys. If you've got any questions, please send me a message. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.